Welcome to Mythic Slumber, your sanctuary for adult sleep stories. Tonight, we travel farther back than kingdoms, farther back than written memory, beyond the empires carved into stone, beyond the names that survived on broken tablets. There is a whisper, quiet, stubborn, and unfinished. They called it Sumer, a world of reed boats and floodplains, temple towers rising like stairways to the sky, and priests who measured time itself. But what if Sumer was not the beginning? What if it was the seventh civilization, the last page of a much older book? Breathe slowly, let the lamps burn low, let the river move through the darkness, and listen. Because some secrets don't vanish, they simply learn how to hide. If you find sanctuary in these ancient echoes, you're welcome to stay. By subscribing and leaving a light upon this video, you help our constellations shine brighter, guiding other weary travellers home to sleep. The morning comes slowly in the land between rivers, not with a sudden burst of light, but with a careful brightening, as if the world is being painted back into existence one soft layer at a time. First, the sky turns the colour of pale clay. Then it warms into rose, then gold. The air is cool enough to make your skin feel awake, yet calm enough to let your thoughts drift like smoke from a distant fire. Somewhere in the quiet, water moves. Not the loud crashing of ocean waves, but the steady breath of a river. The kind of sound that never rushes, never stops. A sound that has been here longer than any human name. And as that river continues its slow, patient work, a city begins to appear. Uruk. It rises from the flat horizon like a dream taking shape. Low walls, mud brick houses, narrow streets. A cluster of rooftops pressed together like sleeping animals. The smell of damp earth mixed with ash. The faint sweetness of dates, the distant scent of reed mats drying in the sun. You can imagine footsteps before you hear them, bare feet on hard-packed ground, sandals tapping softly, the gentle call of someone greeting a neighbour across a courtyard, a child's laughter swallowed quickly by the morning air. And above it all, watching, steady and silent, is the temple. Not just a building, a statement, a promise made from brick and belief. In Uruk, the temple is not hidden. It does not blend into the city. It stands above the city like a mountain made by human hands, lifting itself toward the sky as if it remembers something the rest of the world has forgotten. This is the first strange thing about Sumer. It does not feel like a beginning. When you think of the first cities on Earth, you might picture something small, rough, uncertain, a place of trial and error. But Uruk does not look like an experiment. Uruk looks like the answer to a question that has already been solved. The streets are not random. They follow patterns. The city breathes through canals and drains and planned paths. Water is guided, controlled, persuaded to serve the living. Boats slide through narrow channels like dark leaves on the surface of a mirror, and in the early light, when the shadows are long, you might see workers in linen tunics moving in rhythm, carrying baskets, stacking bricks, turning clay into geometry, not chaos, order. The second strange thing about Sumer is how quickly it speaks, not with voice, but with marks. In a small room near the temple, a scribe presses a reed stylus into wet clay. The sound is soft, like raindrops tapping on a window. Tap, 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 a wedge-shaped line, a triangle, a small mark that looks simple, almost childish, until you realize what it means. It is language pinned down, a thought made permanent, a memory that cannot drift away. And when the clay dries, it becomes a small piece of time that refuses to disappear, This is writing. Usually writing arrives slowly, after centuries of struggle and growth. But here, near the dawn of time, it is already waiting, already forming into systems, already used for counting, for trade, for laws and offerings and promises, already doing what writing does best, making humans feel like they can defeat forgetting. You can picture the tablets stacked in baskets, labelled, stored, moved with care. Simple documents that decide who owns what, who owes whom, who has delivered grain, who has failed. Paper does not exist yet. Ink does not exist yet. But Sumer does not need them. Because clay is honest. Clay is patient. Clay can survive fire. And in a land where floodwaters can erase a whole village overnight, there is something poetic about using the same earth that swallows homes to preserve the words of the living. Still, the question lingers. How did they know to do this? How did they become this organized, this capable, this precise, so early? Because writing is only one piece of the puzzle. In Uruk, time itself is measured with confidence. The people here count in ways that feel strangely advanced, not just for survival, but for accuracy. Numbers do not float loosely. They snap into place. They create calendars. They track seasons. They divide the day with careful attention. Even the stars above are not just beautiful, they are useful. From the temple top, priests watch the night sky like it is a great turning machine. They learn where the planets move, where the moon changes, when the river will rise, when the fields will drink, when the storms will come. And this is where the city becomes even more unsettling in its calmness. Because when a place can measure time and track the heavens, it is no longer only living in the present, it is preparing, planning, thinking ahead, like a mind that has already seen what happens when people do not. Uruk is a city that behaves as if it has memory. But memory of what? This is where the whisper begins. Not in the noisy marketplace, not in the bright courtyard. It begins in the quiet places, in the back rooms of temples where oil lamps glow like captured stars, in the storerooms where sealed jars stand shoulder to shoulder, each one holding grain, salt, dried fruit, and secrets, in the hands of elders who speak softly when children come too close. It is said that Sumer was the first, the start of everything, the start of everything, the moment human life stepped into history. But what if that is only the version that survived? But what if it was not the first at all, but the seventh? A world built after others had risen and fallen and vanished beneath mud and water. An empire that inherited fragments, half-truths, and broken instructions left behind like footprints in drying clay. If you listen carefully, the idea does not sound impossible, because this land is the perfect place for beginnings and endings. The rivers that feed Sumer are generous, but they are also hungry. They deposit rich soil, then take it back. They give life, then erase it. They flood without apology. They shift their paths like wandering snakes. In such a place, entire worlds could disappear quietly. A city swallowed by silt. A village dissolved into the river's patience. A library of knowledge turned into soft earth. Pressed down, sealed, hidden. And then, later, another people could arrive. They could build again, not knowing they were stepping on the bones of what came before. Or maybe they did know. Maybe the priests knew. Maybe the kings knew. Maybe that is why the temples are built so high, like hands reaching upward, away from the waterline, away from the forgetting. In Uruk, power does not only mean swords. It means storage. It means records. It means controlling the story of what the world is and what it has always been. Kings rise here with titles carved into stone. Their names are spoken in formal rhythm. Their deeds are declared in loud voices during festivals. They are described as chosen by the gods, favoured, protected. But beneath the celebration, there is always a shadow of fear, because the city knows what it sits beside. Water, time, the endless hunger of erosion. So they build walls, they build canals, they build towers, and they build something else. Quietly, without music, they build continuity. A line that will not break. You can imagine a young apprentice scribe being taught how to press the stylus just right, how to angle the reed so the wedge marks are crisp, how to avoid smudging the wet clay. He does not fully understand it yet, but the teacher does. The teacher knows that writing is not just for counting sheep or baskets of barley. Writing is for survival. Because the greatest enemy of civilization is not war, it is amnesia. The slow forgetting that turns wisdom back into instinct, and instinct back into chaos. So Uruk writes, and Uruk stores, and Uruk counts time like a person counting heartbeats in the dark, making sure the rhythm continues. But still, the strangest thing remains. This city feels too complete, too confident, too quick to become what it is, as if the blueprint for civilization was already waiting somewhere, hidden and ready to be found. Sometimes, in the calm quiet of morning, you can almost picture it. A sealed chamber beneath a temple floor, a room no sunlight has touched in centuries. Clay tablets stacked like sleeping birds, each one holding a sentence that has not been spoken in 1,000 years. And on one of those tablets, perhaps, there is a line that changes everything. Not a spell, not a prophecy. Just a simple record pressed into clay. We were not the first, or maybe this is how to rebuild, or maybe most haunting of all, they will come again. The city stirs, smoke rises, a drum echoes once, then fades, and the river continues its steady movement, patient, unstoppable, remembering more than it reveals. You've arrived at the gates of a world that should not exist so early, so organised, so sure of itself. A world that looks like the start of history. And yet, when you stand here long enough, listening to water and wind and distant voices, you begin to feel something else. A quiet certainty that Sumer is not the beginning. It is the part that survived, and whatever came before it is still there, beneath the silt, beneath the temples, beneath the smooth streets of Uruk, waiting, sleeping, keeping its secret. And as the light climbs higher, as the city wakes fully, we will step deeper into the riverland, toward the tablets, toward the towers, toward the first clues of the lost Sumerian secret, just as the scribes pressed their stylus into the clay to leave a record. If you wish to leave your own mark here tonight, simply press the like button gently. A small, silent signal that you have walked these ancient streets with us. Before there were kings, before there were walls, before there were names carved into stone, there was only the river. Not a symbol, not a myth, a living force. It moved through the land like a slow thought, turning flat emptiness into green possibility. It carried silt and seeds. It brought fish and birds. It drew people to its banks the way fire draws hands on a cold night. In Sumer, the river was everything, and that is why the people feared it, because the same water that feeds you is also the water that can take you. At dawn the river looks gentle, the surface glimmers with early light, and the reeds sway softly as if they are breathing. Small ripples travel outward from unseen movement beneath. A bird lifts into the air, leaving behind a quiet V-shape in the water. You could mistake it for peace. But the river has never known peace. It is patient. It is always working. And if you sit near the bank long enough, you begin to hear what the land itself is saying, not with words, but with rhythm. The water slides forward, carrying a whisper of mud. It presses against the shore, then pulls back. It circles fallen branches. It finds cracks in the earth and opens them wider. It never stops. And after years, decades, centuries, the river changes the world. In Mesopotamia, the river does not stay in one place like a loyal road. It wanders. It shifts. It cuts new channels. It abandons old ones. It spreads into marshland, then dries again. To live here is to live with uncertainty. A farmer may wake one year to discover that the water has moved farther away, leaving his field thirsty and hard. Another year, the water may rise without warning, swallowing the same field under thick, rolling brown flood. It is a land where survival depends on reading signs, on listening closely, on treating the sky and the river like living beings with moods. The people of Sumer learned this early, perhaps earlier than anyone. They did not trust the river to be kind. They built canals, long straight lines carved into earth, guiding water where they wanted it to go. They built levees, they built gates, they built ditches and channels and embankments like a careful web spread across the land. It was engineering, yes, but it was also prayer. Because when you build against a river, you're not just shaping water, you're challenging a force that existed before you. And the river remembers when it was allowed to do whatever it wanted. Sometimes, during the cool hours before sunrise, you can imagine a worker stepping into shallow water with a shovel. He pushes mud aside. The water fills the space immediately, as if pleased to return. He digs deeper, and the river follows, flowing into the new channel like a curious animal. It is quiet work, the kind of work that never looks heroic. And yet, it is the reason civilization can exist here at all. Without canals, Sumer is only flood and dust. But even with canals, the river is never fully controlled, because the river carries another secret, something older and darker than irrigation. The river carries memory, not human memory, written in tablets. The river's memory is deeper. It is written in layers of mud, in silt stacked over silt, pressed down and hardened by time. Every flood leaves a mark, a thin line of earth laid over what came before. And if you could cut the land open like a book and read it layer by layer, you would see the story. Flood, rebuild, flood again, rebuild again. In Sumer, destruction is not a single event, it is a cycle. That is why flood stories cling to this region like mist. You find them everywhere, whispered through generations, carried in songs, pressed into myths. They do not feel like inventions, they feel like memories that refuse to die. Because when a flood comes here, it does not politely knock. It arrives as a wall of brown water moving fast and heavy, carrying trees, carrying reeds, carrying pieces of the world. It pulls down walls, it tears away roofs, it fills streets until the city becomes a lake, and then, when it recedes, it leaves behind silence, a stunned quiet, mud layered thick over everything, hiding what was there before. A flood is not only destruction, it is also erasure, and this is where the idea of the seventh civilization begins to make more sense. Because if you want to hide evidence of what came before, you could not design a better machine than a Mesopotamian flood. A flood does not burn documents, it buries them. It does not leave dramatic ruins standing like broken teeth. It smooths them into the earth until you cannot tell where the city ends and the plain begins. The river is generous, yes, but it is also a great slow thief. It steals the past. It steals foundations. It steals roads and markets and homes and temples, and then pretends nothing was there. So if there truly were civilizations before Sumer, older ones, forgotten ones, their remains may not be missing at all. They may simply be hidden under the river's patience, under layers of clay that have been pressed into a seal no human meant to create. And if that is true, then Sumer's greatness becomes even more haunting. Because Sumer did not rise in a safe, stable land. Sumer rose in a land that tries to wipe the slate clean, again and again. To build a city here is to build with the knowledge that it may vanish. To write in clay here is to write because you expect the world to forget. And that expectation changes everything. It makes you think differently. It makes you store more than you display. It makes you build temples higher. It makes you treat knowledge like a precious thing, a candle flame in a windy world. You can picture a priest walking through a temple storeroom. The lamps are low, the air smells of dust and oil. Clay jars stand in rows. Sealed tablets rest on shelves like sleeping stones. He pauses, not because he is lost, but because he is listening. Outside he can hear it, the river. Even from inside thick mud brick walls the sound carries, faint, steady, endless. The priest has lived long enough to know what that sound means. It means life, but it also means warning. Because the river is never just water. It is the memory of past floods. It is the promise of future floods. It is the reminder that everything built by human hands is temporary. And yet, the priest also knows something else, that the river can be fooled just a little. If you build above it, if you keep records, if you anchor memory in clay and stone. This is why Sumer's obsession with lists and ledgers feels more than practical. It feels like fear turned into order, a society formed not only by abundance, but by fear of losing abundance overnight. Even their myths reflect this. Their gods are not gentle forest spirits. They are forces, storm gods, water gods, sky gods, gods who argue, who punish, who demand offerings, who can turn their faces away and let a city starve. Because the people of the Riverland do not imagine the universe as soft. They imagine it as powerful, unpredictable, something that must be respected, watched, measured. That is why the temple is also an observatory. That is why the priests track the stars. Because you cannot stop a flood with strength, but you might predict it with knowledge. And when you begin predicting natural forces, you begin building a civilization that feels like it has advanced too quickly. Sumer did not only tame land, it learned how to listen to patterns, the same pattern in the sky, the same pattern in the water. The same pattern in time, and here, in the quiet centre of it all, is the secret that the river teaches. Everything returns, water returns, storms return, harvest returns, destruction returns, rebuilding returns, and perhaps knowledge returns too, passed down, rediscovered, reawakened, like a seed waiting beneath the soil for the right season. If the world had risen and fallen before, the river would have watched it happen. If cities had existed before Uruk, the river would have flowed over them, burying them gently, pressing them into the earth like a hidden archive. The river does not care about names. It does not care about pride. It only cares about movement. And yet it accidentally preserves what it destroys. Because under flood layers, there is still shape. There is still evidence. There are still bones of buildings, and broken tools, and tablets sealed in mud, waiting for hands that will one day dig them up. That is the haunting beauty of this land. It erases, but it also keeps. It hides, but it also protects. In the end, the river is not only a killer, it is also a vault, a slow, heavy lock that seals away the past. And if Sumer truly is the seventh civilization, then the river is the reason the first six vanished without leaving a clear footprint. Not because they never existed, but because they were folded into the earth like pages pressed shut. And now, as the city of Uruk grows louder with waking life, as oars dip into canals and market stalls begin to open, remember this: everything you see here is built on shifting ground, built beside a force that can erase it, and yet Sumer rises anyway, writing anyway, counting anyway, building anyway. Because when you live beside a river that remembers everything, you learn the only way to defeat forgetting is to become unforgettable. And deeper down, beneath the soft mud, beneath the layers of old floods, the river keeps its oldest secret. The proof of what came before. The shadow of the lost worlds. The first hint that Sumer was not the beginning, but the return. The river always returns. And if you wish to return as well, to follow the current deeper into the past, then subscribe now. Join us as we drift toward the next secret, waiting just beyond the bend. In Sumer, memory does not live in books. There are no bound pages here, no ink, no paper that turns yellow with time. Instead, memory lives in clay, heavy, humble clay, pressed by a reed into shapes so small they look like scratches, until you realize those scratches are a voice, a promise, a list, a warning, a world pinned down so it cannot drift away. If the river is the great force that erases, then the tablets are the quiet rebellion against erasure. And to understand Sumer, you have to follow the sound of the stylus. Tap, tap, tap. The sound is soft, like the beginning of rain. It comes from a shaded room near the temple complex where the air is cooler and the light falls gently through reed screens. The floor is packed earth. The walls are thick mud brick, holding back the heat like a protective hand. Inside, a young scribe sits cross-legged, shoulders slightly hunched, focused as if the whole world has narrowed into the size of his palm. In front of him is a wet tablet, smooth, grey-brown, freshly shaped, still shining slightly with moisture. He holds a reed stylus between his fingers and presses it down with careful confidence. A wedge mark appears, then another, then another. At first it looks like nothing, but then it becomes something. A number, a name, a measure of grain, a record of a transaction that must be remembered for weeks, for months, maybe for years. Because once a city grows large, words alone are no longer enough. A city is not just people living together. A city is movement. Food moving into storage, goods moving between merchants, animals counted at gates, workers paid in barley, taxes gathered for the temple. Debts tracked until they are cleared, and if you let those things float around in the air carried only by memory, the city collapses under its own confusion. So Sumer writes, not for poetry at first, not for dreams, but for survival. To live here is to understand that forgetting is dangerous. A forgotten debt becomes a feud. A forgotten delivery becomes famine. A forgotten boundary becomes war. So the scribes become the keepers of calm. They do not fight battles. They prevent battles. They smooth chaos into order with lines pressed into wet earth. And what makes this even more unsettling is how quickly it all becomes normal. The system does not feel fragile. It feels established. There are teachers here, older scribes with steady hands and tired eyes, showing students how to shape tablets, how to write clean marks, how to keep spacing consistent, how to correct mistakes without smearing the clay. There are rules, there are styles, there are formats, there are expectations. As if Sumer did not invent writing slowly, but stepped into it like a practiced art. Outside the room you can hear the city, the murmur of trade, the distant sound of someone calling out prices, the thump of baskets being set down, the creak of rope, the splash of oars in a canal. All of it is held together by something unseen. Records. A marketplace is noisy, but a record is silent. It waits. It does not argue. It does not forget. And over time, the city begins to trust the tablets more than it trusts people. If there is disagreement, you do not wrestle in the street. You go to the temple office, you find the tablet, you read the marks, and the marks decide the truth. This is why Sumer feels like it appears fully formed, because writing is not just an invention. It is a mindset. It is the decision to freeze life into proof, to turn the present into something permanent, and once a civilization learns to do that, it advances quickly, like a river given a channel. Soon the tablets are not only lists of barley and sheep, soon they are contracts, marriage agreements, land boundaries, laws written like fences made of words. Soon they are prayers, offerings recorded so the gods will not forget what is owed to them. Soon they are hymns, the names of gods stacked like pillars, the titles of kings carved into clay with the confidence of immortality. And then, deeper still, something stranger appears, not in every tablet, not on the ones placed openly on shelves, but in the tablets meant to be hidden. The ones sealed, the ones stored away, because Sumer has different kinds of memory. There is public memory, trade and law and ritual, and then there is private memory, the kind that makes people uneasy, the kind that does not want to be repeated too often. Sometimes in the back corridors of the temple, there are storage rooms so quiet you can hear your own breath. The light is dim, warm, and wavering. Oil lamps sit in shallow bowls, their flames trembling whenever someone passes. Rows of shelves line the walls, and on those shelves are tablets stacked like bricks. Hundreds. Thousands. Each one small enough to fit in two hands, yet heavy with the weight of what it knows. A visitor might think these are merely boring records, but if you stand there long enough, you start to understand the scale. This is a city writing itself into existence every day. This is a civilization building a second life beneath the surface, an invisible world made of proof, and proof is power. The temple does not only speak to the gods, it speaks to the city. It controls what is remembered and what is forgotten. It controls the story. A farmer might own land, but the temple owns the record of that land. A merchant might earn wealth, but the temple records his debts. A king might rule with a crown, but the temple preserves the laws that justify his rule. In Sumer, writing becomes a kind of invisible architecture. Walls made of information. And now the idea of the lost Sumerian secret becomes even sharper. Because a society that writes this much can hide things this much. Imagine the difference between a spoken rumour and a written truth. A rumour can dissolve in a week. A tablet can survive a fire. A tablet can survive burial. A tablet can survive the flood. And here, in this land of shifting rivers and sudden erasure, that matters more than anything. Clay is not fragile. Clay becomes stone with time. So when the scribes press their marks into wet tablets, they are not just recording today, they're sending a message forward to people they will never meet, to eyes not yet born. Even the most ordinary tablet becomes a small time capsule. a voice pushed into the future, and the city knows it. That is why tablets are treated with care. That is why they are stacked in order, labelled, stored. That is why they are carried like precious goods. Not because clay is expensive, but because memory is expensive. Now imagine a different kind of tablet, not one about grain, not one about taxes, but one that begins with an older tone, a different rhythm, a list of names that do not match the kings you know, a record of a place that no longer exists, a reference to a flood that was not recent but ancient beyond counting, or perhaps a set of instructions that seem too advanced for this age. How to measure the stars, how to build a canal so perfectly straight it defies the eye, how to store knowledge in a way that outlasts disaster, how to rebuild after the world has been reset. The temple would not place such tablets in public view. It would keep them deep, protected, locked away behind ritual and authority. Because knowledge, in the wrong hands, is not just useful, it is dangerous. And this is the thing most people forget about ancient civilizations. They were not innocent, they were human. They had politics. They had ambition. They had fear. They had rivals. And they understood that the future is shaped by what you allow to be remembered. So perhaps the lost Sumerian secret was not lost because it vanished. Perhaps it was lost because it was deliberately buried under dust and religion and silence. Perhaps it sits even now, waiting beneath a layer of ordinary tablets, a secret hidden inside boredom, a mystery sealed behind routine. Because what better place to hide a secret than a library? Not a library of beautiful books, but a library of clay. A place so quiet it feels dead. A place so full of records it feels endless. A place where one tablet can disappear among 10,000 and never be noticed. Outside, the city continues. The market grows loud. The sun climbs. The canals sparkle. Children run. Goats bleat. A bell ring from a temple courtyard. Life moves forward as if it has no shadow behind it. But inside the storerooms, the tablets remain still. Each one a small frozen moment. Each one a piece of Suma's true body, its memory. And if you listen closely in the dimness, you can almost hear it. Not spoken, not sung, but pressed into clay and waiting. A whisper from beneath the dust. We were here before. We built before. We fell before. And we left something for you. In the next chapter we will climb higher, toward the ziggurat itself, toward the towering shape that watches the city like a silent guardian. Because some buildings are not only built to honour gods, some are built to resist forgetting, and in Sumer, forgetting is the enemy that never sleeps. From the street level of Uruk, the temple seems impossibly tall, not because it is a mountain, but because it feels like a choice, a decision made by thousands of hands across years and generations to keep building upward, even when the land itself is flat and restless, even when the river is always watching. In the morning the ziggurat catches light first. Its upper terraces glow before the homes below even wake. From far away it looks like a stepped sunrise made of brick, layer upon layer, rising patiently toward the pale sky. And in a city built of mud and reed, that kind of height feels like defiance. You walk toward it through narrow streets that slowly widen into open space. Courtyards appear, small shrines, storage rooms, workshops where bricks dry in neat stacks, smelling of earth and sun. The air changes near the temple. It becomes quieter, as if voices lower themselves without being told. Even footsteps soften. Even children seem to understand they're stepping into a different kind of place. At the base of the ziggurat, you can see how carefully it is made. Each brick is shaped with intention. Each step is aligned not only to support weight, but to guide movement. There is a rhythm to it, wide stairways, landings, terraces, like a slow breath leading you upward. And as you begin to climb, the city below starts to flatten into patterns. Roof lines become rectangles, streets become thin threads, people become moving dots, quiet and distant, as if the ziggurat is lifting you out of ordinary life and into something calmer, something larger. Halfway up, you pause, not because you are exhausted, but because the wind becomes noticeable here. It touches your skin like cool water. It carries dust, faint and dry, mixed with the distant smell of fires and baked bread. Your hair stirs. Your clothing shifts gently against your body. You feel the world moving around you, and you realize something strange. This tower is not built for comfort. It is built for perspective. Down below, a person can think only in days and meals and errands. Down below, the river feels like the whole universe, close enough to hear, close enough to fear. But from here you can see beyond the river, beyond the canals, beyond the fields where farmers bend to the work that never ends. The horizon opens wide and quiet. You can see the land stretching outward like a blank tablet waiting for marks, and when you look at something from high enough, it becomes easier to believe that it can be organized, measured, controlled. This is what the ziggurat offers, not just worship, control through distance. In Sumer, the temple is the heart of the city, but the ziggurat is the eye. It watches, it notices, it keeps track. As you climb higher, the noise of Uruk fades into a soft blur. A market shout becomes only a suggestion. A dog barking becomes a faint echo. Even the river seems quieter now, as if it is speaking from far away. At the top terrace, there is space. Not a crowded space, but open enough to feel like the world has been cleared for thought. The sun is brighter here, and the shadows are sharper. The breeze moves freely, and with it comes the feeling that you are standing on the edge of something ancient and important. This is where the priests come, not in a rush, not with chaos, but with slow, practiced steps. They carry small tools, bowls of oil, bundles of reeds, cords with knots, tablets held close against their chests. They do not look like warriors, they look like keepers, and what they keep is not gold, it is time. Because from the top of the ziggurat the sky is not just beautiful, it is readable. The stars spread out like scattered grains across dark cloth. The moon climbs and dips through its phases. The planets drift with strange steadiness, never wandering randomly, always following invisible roads. To most people below, the heavens are distant gods. To the priests, the heavens are a pattern, and patterns can be learned. You can imagine it clearly. Night after night, the same priest returns to this height, the same terrace, the same view. He watches where a certain star rises and where it falls. He notes when the moon is thin as a blade and when it is full and bright as a lamp. He presses marks into clay, quietly, steadily, like someone building a bridge across time. This is how Sumer becomes powerful so quickly, not by dreaming wildly, but by observing patiently. Because when you can measure the sky, you can predict seasons. When you can predict seasons, you can plan planting. When you can plan planting, you can store grain. When you can store grain, you can survive drought. And when you can survive drought while your neighbours suffer, you become a civilization that feels almost supernatural. But the truth is gentler. It is not magic. It is attention, and the ziggurat is where attention becomes authority. In the soft darkness of late evening, the ziggurat also becomes something else, a beacon, not with flames or shining metal, but with presence, a tower visible from miles away, a shape that anchors the land. If you're a traveller approaching Uruk, you may not see the walls first. You may see the ziggurat. You may see it rising from the haze, a stepped silhouette against the sky, and you will know you're entering a place where humans have done something unusual. They have built a staircase for their dreams, and perhaps for their secrets. Because in every civilization there are two kinds of knowledge. The knowledge everyone uses, and the knowledge only a few are allowed to touch. The ziggurat is public enough to be admired, but private enough to be controlled. A place where the city looks upward and feels humble. A place where the priests look outward and feel powerful. And if Sumer truly carries a hidden inheritance, if it truly is not the first civilization, but the seventh, then the ziggurat becomes even more important. Because height is not only for seeing the stars, height is also for keeping something safe from the water. The river floods the lowlands. It swallows houses, markets, fields, but it struggles to reach what is raised. The higher you build, the more you resist forgetting. A tower made of brick becomes, in its own way, a life raft. Now imagine for a moment, what might exist inside such a structure? Beneath the terraces, behind thick walls, there are chambers, storage rooms where offerings are kept, records and seals and tools, rooms where only certain people are allowed. The air inside would be cooler, heavy with dust, smelling of clay and oil and old reed mats. The light would be dim, entering through narrow openings like thin blades. And somewhere deeper, deeper than the public rooms, there may be spaces with no windows at all, sealed spaces, protected spaces, spaces designed not to display but to preserve. This is the part people rarely think about when they imagine ancient temples. Temples were not only spiritual places, they were administrative centres, they were banks, they were archives, they were the brain of the city. And the ziggurat, the highest point, was not just a symbol. It was a vault built upward, a monument that says, this knowledge must survive. If the world truly had previous ages, older civilizations wiped away by floods, by drought, by time itself, then those ages may have learned one lesson above all others. Keep your records high, keep your memory safe, keep your secrets where the river cannot reach. You stand at the top, and the city below seems peaceful. The canals shine faintly. The rooftops glow softly in moonlight. Smoke rises in thin lines from cooking fires, fading into the night. From here, the world looks quiet enough to last forever. But the priests know better. They have watched the river rise. They have watched storms gather. They have watched years when the fields crack dry, and years when the water eats the land like an animal. They understand that the city's greatest enemy is not an army at the gates. It is time. So they build upward. They mark the sky. They press records into clay. They create systems that can survive chaos. And as you stand there with the wind brushing your skin, you begin to feel it. That the ziggurat is not only a ladder to heaven, it is a ladder out of forgetting. A way of saying, to the river and to the world, we will not vanish quietly, we will be remembered. And somewhere inside that great step tower, inside its shadows and sealed rooms, the lost Sumerian secret waits like a sleeping ember. Not gone, not dead, only hidden. In the next chapter we will move away from the height and into the mist. toward the strange figures that stand at the edge of myth and record, the ones who come before kings, the ones who teach and vanish and leave civilizations changed forever, the Watchers, who may have been there long before Uruk ever opened its eyes to the sun. There is a certain kind of silence that lives inside old lists, not the silence of an empty room, but the silence of something watching. Because when you read the ancient records of Sumer, names pressed into clay, titles stacked in careful order, you begin to notice a strange feeling creeping in beneath the certainty, as if the story is complete, and yet incomplete, as if someone has edited the beginning, as if the first pages of the world have been torn away and only the middle survives. In the temples, scribes keep lists the way fishermen keep nets, patiently, carefully, knowing that order is what prevents loss. They list grain, they list goats, they list workers, they list offerings, and they also list kings. A chain of rulers meant to prove that the city has always had a spine, always had a centre, always had a name to follow. But when the kings are written down, something happens. The rhythm changes, the atmosphere shifts, the marks on the tablet start to feel heavier, more ceremonial, as if the clay itself knows these names are not simple. These are not the names of merchants or bakers or boatmen. These are the names of fate. And at first the list feels comforting. One king after another. A steady line. A civilization with continuity. But then you reach the beginning. And the beginning does not behave like history. It behaves like a dream. Because the first kings are not like the ones that follow. They do not reign for 10 years, or 20, or 40. They reign for lifetimes that stretch into impossibility. Hundreds of years. Thousands. Numbers so large they stop feeling like math and start feeling like myth. A modern mind might dismiss it quickly. Symbols, you might say. Legends. Exaggeration. But in Sumer, exaggeration is not used casually. Sumerians were careful people. They counted everything. They measured everything. They recorded debts down to the last grain of barley. So why would they become careless only when speaking about their earliest rulers? That question sits in the mind like a stone in the shoe. You can ignore it at first, but with every step you feel it. And this is where the whisper begins to rise again. The whisper that says Sumer was not the first. The whisper that says civilization has happened before. The whisper that says knowledge does not appear from nowhere. It arrives. Sometimes it is inherited. Sometimes it is stolen. Sometimes it is taught. Imagine a night in Uruk. The city is quieter now. Fires burn low. The canals are dark ribbons between buildings. The air is cool, carrying the scent of damp reeds and ashes from cooking. Inside the temple, a priest sits with an apprentice. A lamp flickers between them, painting their faces in warm, breathing light. The apprentice holds a tablet, eyes wide with attention. The priest speaks slowly, his voice a gentle weight in the silence. He's not telling a story for entertainment. He's teaching the shape of the world, and he begins not with kings, but with what came before them. The first rulers, he says, were not like the ones you will see today. He does not laugh when he says it. He does not smile. He says it like truth. Before crowns were common, he continues, before laws were carved into stone, there were Watchers. That word lands softly. Watchers. The apprentice might imagine a soldier standing guard on the city wall, but the priest means something else. Because in the old stories, the Watchers are not simply people who observe, they are people who know. They are figures who appear when the world is young and uncertain, bringing structure like a hand pressing order into wet clay. They're described in different ways depending on who speaks. Sometimes they are wise men from distant lands. Sometimes they are half-divine guides. Sometimes they are servants of the gods. Sometimes they are simply called the ones who came down. The priest does not explain everything at once. He lets mystery remain, like space between notes of music. Because mystery is powerful, and in a civilization built on control, power is never given away freely. The apprentice's eyes drift to the shelves behind them, rows of tablets in shadow stacked like sleeping bricks. How do we know they existed, he asks. The priest lifts his hand, and with one finger he taps the clay tablet gently. Tap. A sound small enough to disappear instantly. We know, the priest says, because the marks remain. He does not mean physical marks alone, he means patterns. Sumer is full of patterns that feel older than the city itself. The sudden arrival of writing, the precision of calendars, the way the temples align with the heavens, the numbers that govern time, divisions so complex they feel like they were designed by minds already comfortable with counting the universe. These things can be invented, yes, but invention is usually messy, full of failed attempts, full of slow improvement. Yet Sumer, in its earliest visible form, seems to step forward already holding the tools, as if the tools were waiting, as if someone placed them into human hands and said, "Use these if you wish to survive." That is why the Watchers matter. They are the missing bridge between chaos and order, the invisible teachers behind the first lessons, and when you look around Uruk, its canals, its records, its towering ziggurat, you begin to understand how easily a civilization could believe such figures were real, because the city itself feels like evidence. A city does not happen by accident. A city is planned, and planning begins with knowledge. Now listen closely, and you can feel the deeper tension beneath this myth. The Watchers are not only admired, they are feared, because in every story where knowledge arrives from beyond, there is always a shadow question. Why did they give it? Was it generosity or control? Was it guidance, or a leash disguised as a gift? The priest, if you asked him, would probably answer with a calm shrug. The gods do not give without purpose. And in Sumer, purpose is everything. Even the river floods with purpose, whether humans understand it or not. The apprentice might stare at the lamp flame, imagining the Watchers as glowing figures stepping down onto the plain long ago, their voices carrying like wind over water. But the priest would steer him towards something more useful. Not imagination, responsibility. Because the Watchers, in Sumerian thought, are not there to inspire wonder. They are there to set a standard, to remind humans they were shaped by something greater, to make the temple necessary, to make obedience feel holy. In the quiet hours before sunrise, when the city is still and the sky is pale, there are priests who climb the ziggurat and look down at Uruk like a shepherd watching sheep. They know the people trust them, they know the people need them, and they know the stories they tell become the walls that keep society from splintering. A story about Watchers is a story that says, you are not alone in the universe. You are being observed. Your actions matter. Your city matters. Your obedience matters. It is a comforting story, and it is also a controlling one. That is the strange beauty of Sumer. It holds two truths at once without flinching: wonder and authority, mystery and paperwork, stars and taxes, prayer and law. So when Sumer speaks of Watchers, it may be speaking of many things at the same time. Perhaps the Watchers were real people, travellers from older cultures carrying knowledge across deserts, arriving like sudden rain. Perhaps the Watchers were priests of the first temples, remembered as more than human because they brought order to chaos. Perhaps the Watchers were simply an explanation for something the Sumerians could not explain. The sudden leap, the strange completeness, the feeling that the city was built on top of something older. Because if Sumer truly is the seventh civilization, then maybe the Watchers were the survivors of the sixth, the last keepers of a world that fell, bringing fragments forward in their hands like embers saved from a dying fire. Imagine it. A flood recedes, mud hardens, ruins vanish beneath silt. The old world is gone, except for a few who remain, moving across the empty land with knowledge in their minds, searching for a place to begin again. When they find the riverland, they teach, not everything, only what is necessary, how to measure time, how to store grain, how to shape symbols into writing, how to build upward, above the reach of forgetting. They teach the survival kit of civilization, and then, when the new world is stable, they disappear into myth. Not because they were magical, but because humans are always tempted to turn teachers into gods, because gods are easier to obey, because gods cannot be questioned. The lamp crackles, the temple breathes in stillness. The apprentice holds the tablet like it is heavier now. Outside, the river moves in the dark, carrying its own ancient memory. And somewhere above the city, the stars remain steady, watching without blinking. If you stand long enough in this story, you begin to feel the shape of the secret. That Sumer is a doorway, that behind it there are other doors, older ones, buried deeper. And the Watchers are the guardians of those doors, whether they were real or symbolic, flesh or legend. In the next chapter, we will look at the myths themselves, and the strange way they sometimes hide things that do not feel like poetry. Not just gods, not just monsters, but tools, measurements, systems, the kind of secrets that build civilizations and can rebuild them again. In Sumer, stories do not live only in the imagination. They live in the real world. They cling to brick walls and riverbanks. They travel through marketplaces and temple courtyards. They slip into lullabies, into prayers, into the quiet warnings of elders who speak in half sentences. And if you listen carefully, you begin to notice something strange. Sumerian myths are not made of pure fantasy. They are made of structure. They feel like stories, but they behave like instructions, like someone wrapped knowledge in a cloak of gods and monsters so it could survive longer than a generation, longer than a dynasty, longer than the memory of a single city. Because in the Riverland, knowledge has enemies: flood, fire, war, forgetting, and the smartest knowledge is the knowledge that learns how to hide. So it hides inside myth. A child may hear the tale as entertainment. A priest may recite it as sacred truth. But a builder, a planner, a ruler might hear something else inside it. A design, a method, a quiet machine turning beneath the poetry. Think of the world as Sumer saw it. A flat plain, endlessly open, where the sky feels huge and the river feels alive. A place where the seasons can change like moods, where the wind can carry dust for days, where the sun can harden mud brick into stone. This is not a land where you can survive by guessing. It is a land where you survive by measuring. So Sumer measures everything. Not obsessively, not nervously, but with the calm confidence of people who have learned that precision is the difference between harvest and hunger. A canal must be the right width. A levee must be the right height. A granary must hold enough for the dry months. A temple must align with the sky, because the sky is the calendar. And slowly, the mythology begins to glow with a second meaning. A story is told about a god who sets boundaries between waters or separates the river from the land. That sounds like cosmic creation, until you remember the workmen who dig canals and shape levees. A myth speaks of a divine hand ordering the world. That sounds like spiritual language, until you notice how often Sumer's survival depends on order made physical. Even the way they describe power reveals it. A god does not only strike enemies, a god measures, a god counts, a god decides timing. The universe, in Sumerian thinking, is not random, it is scheduled. And if the universe is scheduled, then the one who controls the schedule controls reality. This is where calendars become sacred. Because in Sumer, the calendar is not just a way to plan festivals, it is a way to prevent disaster. Plant too early and the seedlings die. Plant too late and the heat burns everything before it ripens. Harvest at the wrong time and mold steals what you worked for. So the priest watched the moon and the stars, and in their hands, observation becomes certainty. They learn the rhythm of months, the pattern of seasons, the timing of floods and dryness. They turn the sky into a clock. Then they translate that clock into the city's behaviour. When to plant, when to store, when to trade, when to prepare, when to stop. And the people obey, not only because the priests are powerful, but because the city survives when it listens. In many places, religion is about mystery. In Sumer, religion is also about scheduling. And now the machine inside the myth becomes clearer, because a machine is simply a system that repeats reliably. A machine is a pattern you can trust. And in Sumer, the greatest machines were not made of metal. They were made of rules. One of those rules lives in their numbers. Sumer counts in a way that feels unusually sophisticated, almost unnatural for a world so old. Their system divides time and circles into pieces that fit together smoothly. Their measurements allow trade to scale. Their math allows building to rise. Their counting allows taxes, wages, inventory, storage, and suddenly you understand why writing arrives so quickly. Because writing is not only art, it is technology. It is the tool that allows complexity without collapse. A city of a few families can survive on spoken memory. A city of tens of thousands cannot. So Sumer builds the second machine, the machine of record, clay tablets as gears, scribes as hands that keep the machine turning, temples as warehouses of information, and what happens when you combine accurate measurement with permanent record. You create something stronger than weapons. You create administration, the ability to move food and labour and supplies like pieces on a board. You create the invisible skeleton of civilization. Even the myths about gods handing down laws can be read this way. A law is not just a moral rule. It is a technology of behaviour. It makes thousands of strangers function like one body. It tells them where the boundary is. It tells them what happens if they cross it. It tells them what is allowed, what is forbidden, what is rewarded, what is punished. It turns chaos into predictable motion, and predictability is the true treasure of the Riverland, because a flood is unpredictable, a drought is unpredictable, but a law is consistent, a record is consistent, a schedule is consistent. So Sumer worships the things that make life consistent, not because they are boring, but because they are life-saving. Now imagine the myths again. Those tales of divine tools, sacred objects, gifts from the gods, a weapon blessed by a deity, a helmet that hides the wearer, a bag that holds what should not be held, a shining mirror that allows you to face danger indirectly. At first, they sound like magical gifts, but underneath, they may represent something else. A helmet that hides you is also the concept of invisibility through strategy, not confronting every threat directly, knowing when to disappear. A bag that holds danger safely is also the concept of containment, isolation, storage. The idea that some things must be controlled, sealed, kept away from the ordinary world. A mirror used to defeat a monster is the most important of all, because it is not just a trick, it is a philosophy. You can face the terrifying without staring into it. In modern life, we would call it distance, mediation, a tool between you and the danger. But Sumerians understood this instinctively. You do not wrestle the river, you guide it. You do not fight the flood with your hands, you build a levee and let the earth do the work. You do not argue with the stars, you learn them. The machine hidden inside Sumer's myths is this repeating idea. Survive by indirect control, win by system, not strength. And once you see it everywhere. In the market, a merchant measures grain with a standardized weight. He does not guess. He does not feel the amount. He uses a tool that produces fairness and therefore produces peace. In a field, a farmer builds small channels that guide water. He does not chase water. He does not plead with it. He shapes a path and lets gravity do the persuasion. In the temple, a priest charts the moon's phases. He does not beg the sky for meaning. He watches, records, predicts, and because of these systems, the city begins to feel like it is running on hidden engines. Not loud engines, quiet ones, engines made of observation and repetition, engines made of knowledge that survives. This is why the idea of Sumer as the seventh civilization keeps breathing beneath the story. Because when knowledge appears this precise, this settled, this effective, it feels like it has already been tested before, like the world tried this once, failed, then tried again, wiser. And what is the fastest way to carry wisdom across destruction? Not buildings, not kings, not armies, but methods, patterns that can be repeated anywhere. Math, calendars, writing, measurement, systems that rebuild themselves as soon as humans remember them. A tool can be lost, but an idea can reappear. A city can drown, but the concept of irrigation can rise again. A library can burn, but the habit of recording can return as soon as someone feels the first panic of confusion. And the myths become the carriers of those habits. Because myths are easy to remember, a child can forget a lesson on agriculture, but they will remember a story about a god who taught humans how to plant. They will remember a tale about divine order defeating chaos. They will remember the symbols, and the symbols will guide them back to the methods when they grow older. So in Sumer, the gods are not only beings of worship, they are storage containers. They hold concepts, they hold systems, they preserve civilization's tools inside sacred language. That way, even if floods bury cities, even if kingdoms fall, even if names turn to dust, the method survives in the mouth of the next generation. A story told around a fire, a hymn sung on temple steps, a whispered myth on a quiet night when the river sounds too loud. And if you stand in that quiet long enough, you can almost feel it. The ancient mind behind the design. The calm voice that understood the world could end suddenly. The voice that thought ahead. That wrapped survival knowledge in the clothing of divinity, so it could travel farther than stone, so it could outlast empires, so it could wait patiently for the next rebuild. The lost Sumerian secret may not be a single hidden room or forbidden tablet. It may be something softer and deeper, a secret so simple it can hide in plain sight. Civilization is not a place, it is a pattern, and Sumer, with all its towers and tablets and myths, may be the proof that patterns can survive anything, even the river that tries to erase the world. In the daytime, the temple looks like certainty. Its walls stand firm in the sun. Its steps are worn smooth by generations of feet. Its courtyards smell of incense, warm dust, and crushed herbs. People come and go with offerings in their hands, bowls of grain, jars of oil, bundles of reeds, moving with the calm obedience of those who believe the world is being watched. From the outside, it feels complete, a monument built to hold the city together. But every great structure has two lives, the life people see and the life hidden underneath. Because a temple is not only a place where prayers rise, it is also a place where secrets sink. If you walk close enough, if you slow down enough, you begin to notice the quiet details. The way certain corridors bend where they don't need to. The way some doors are always shut. The way certain priests move differently, soft-footed, careful, like they're guarding something that cannot be spoken aloud. The city trusts the temple because the temple feels stable, but stability is often built on things you never see. And in Sumer, the most powerful things are rarely on display. Tonight we move away from the bright courtyards and into the shadowed edges of sacred space, not to chase danger, but to follow the gentle pull of curiosity. Because in every civilization, when knowledge becomes precious, it also becomes restricted. A scribe may record the world in clay, but not every tablet belongs to everyone. A priest may speak of the gods, but not every truth is meant for the marketplace. A king may rule the city, but even a king must knock on certain doors, and deep beneath the temple, there is always at least one door that does not welcome knocking. It begins with a staircase, not the wide public stairs that lead upward to open terraces and visible altars. This staircase is narrow. It is tucked behind a curtain, behind an ordinary-looking doorway, behind a passage that feels too quiet to belong to daytime life. The air changes as soon as you descend. The heat thins out. The stone grows cooler underfoot. The sound of the city becomes distant, replaced by a soft, thick silence that presses gently against the ears. If there is light, it comes from a small oil lamp carried in steady hands. The flame trembles but does not die. It paints the walls in warm, breathing colour, flicker and shadow, like the temple is inhaling and exhaling in the dark. The smell down here is different too, less incense. More clay, more earth. The scent of sealed places, old dust, dried reeds, a trace of something mineral and ancient, like the memory of the river itself. This is where the temple stops being a symbol and becomes a machine. Because under the floor the temple has rooms that are not for ceremony. They are for storage, for accounting, for control, for preservation. And preservation in the Riverland is a form of power almost too large to understand. A city can lose a battle and recover, but if a city loses its records, it loses itself. So the temple keeps its heart underground. Here, these shelves are not made for beauty. They're made for endurance. Thick wooden planks, stacked baskets, clay jars sealed with wax and cloth, tablets arranged in careful groups like bricks in a hidden wall. The lamp's glow catches the edges of each tablet, and for a moment you can imagine that every shelf is a sleeping crowd. Thousands of tiny voices held still, waiting to be woken by the right reader. But not all voices are equal. Some are meant to be heard. Some are meant to be kept. A young priest once asked his elder why certain rooms were locked while others remained open. The elder did not answer directly. He only said, "Not every name is safe to speak." And then, after a long pause, he added, "Some names are doors." In Sumer, words are not only sounds, words are keys. A temple is built around this idea. Public words are gentle, blessings, hymns, requests for protection. Private words are heavier, agreements, oaths, records of debt. And beneath those, deeper still, there are words that are almost never spoken at all, names whispered only in the most controlled rituals. Names that belong to stories older than the city's walls, names tied to the Watchers, to the Flood, to the first arrangements of the world. Because if myths are vessels for knowledge, then the oldest myths are the strongest vessels of all. And the temple does not want those vessels to spill, so it seals them. Imagine a chamber down here with no windows, a room so still the air feels thick. The door is not decorated, it is not meant to impress, it is meant to discourage. There are no public markings, no carved promises, no painted warnings, only the simple weight of a boundary. This room, you can sense, is not for daily use. It is a room you enter only when the situation is severe, when the city is threatened, when famine looms, when the river rises too high too fast, when the sky behaves strangely and the priests become quiet. Because in those moments, the temple may need to do what it was truly designed for, not to comfort people, but to access what was hidden for survival. This is how secrets work in civilizations. They are not always secrets because they are evil. Sometimes they are secrets because they are powerful, and power, if spread too widely, becomes uncontrollable. So the temple decides who may carry it, who may touch it, who may read it. In the deeper corridors there is a different kind of tablet, not the ones used for barley counts, not the ones listing workers and wages. These tablets are thicker, older, sometimes sealed in clay envelopes like letters never meant for casual hands. The writing on them is tighter, the marks press deeper, as if the scribe's hand carried more urgency, and sometimes the language itself shifts. The words feel ritualistic, formal, as if the tablet is not merely recording the world, but binding it. This is where the lost Sumerian secret begins to feel less like a fantasy and more like a possibility. Because if Sumer truly inherited knowledge from before, where would they keep it? Not in the market, not in homes that floodwaters can swallow, not in open courtyards where rival eyes can linger. They would keep it here, in the earth, behind doors that only the temple can open, in rooms guarded by silence more than soldiers. You can picture it clearly. A priest kneels on a woven mat, lamp beside him. A sealed tablet rests in front of him like a sleeping animal. His hands are steady as he breaks the clay covering, careful not to crack what lies within. He reads slowly. Not because the marks are hard to understand, but because the meaning is heavy. The kind of meaning that changes decisions. The kind of meaning that makes a temple leader sit in silence for a long time after. Perhaps it is record of an older city found beneath silt. Perhaps it is an account of a flood that erased more than one kingdom. Perhaps it is a map, not of land, but of cycles. A warning that the world does not rise once and stay risen, that it rises and falls like breath. And perhaps the most dangerous part of the secret is not the knowledge itself, but what it implies. That Sumer's greatness was not born alone, that the city's systems were not purely invented, that humans have been here before, building towers and counting the stars and believing they were at the beginning, only to be swallowed by time. If you are a king, that thought is terrifying, because kings survive on the myth of permanence. A king wants people to believe his reign is the centre of the world, but if the world has ended before, then the king is only a temporary figure standing in a repeating storm. So the temple, wiser and colder, keeps the deeper truths for itself. The temple understands something kings often forget. People need hope more than truth. They need stability more than accuracy. They need the feeling that their city is the final shape of history. So the temple gives them ceremonies. It gives them festivals. It gives them songs that say the gods are pleased and the future is safe. And underneath, it keeps the locked room, the sealed tablets, the forbidden names. This creates a strange tension in the city, like a quiet vibration beneath the stone. A normal citizen lives in sunlight and routine, but the temple lives in layers: above ground, worship; below ground, control; and deeper still, preservation of the knowledge that civilization itself is fragile. Now, listen to the quiet down here. You may notice something that feels almost human. The way the corridors bend as if guiding you. The way the air grows cooler in certain turns. The way your footsteps sound louder than they should, as if the temple wants you to remember you are not alone. Because secrecy is not only a physical thing, it is psychological. A sealed room is more than a door. It is a boundary in the mind. It tells you, stop here. This is not for you. This belongs to something older. And the older something is, the heavier the boundary feels. In Sumer, the oldest knowledge is not stored like treasure. It is stored like fire, because fire warms you. But fire also spreads, so you keep it contained, you feed it carefully, you never let it loose in the wrong hands. If the seventh civilization theory is true, then this is what the temple is doing. Not guarding gold, not guarding jewels, guarding instructions, guarding patterns, guarding the truth that the Riverland has ended worlds before, and may end this one too. The lamp flickers again, and for a moment the shadows make the corridor seem longer, deeper, endless. Above you the city continues. People buy bread, boats move through canals. Children grow up believing their world is the first and only. But down here, beneath the temple, the air holds a different kind of belief, that the world has had many beginnings, many endings, and that the next ending can arrive silently, like water rising in the night. In the next chapter, we will step back from the sealed rooms and look at the great pattern itself, the chain of civilizations, the sacred number, the possibility that 7 is not just a symbol, but a memory, a count of worlds that came before, and of one world that survived long enough to write its secrets into clay. There is a certain kind of question that does not leave you once it enters your mind. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it simply stays, quiet and steady, like the river at night. And the question is this: if Sumer looks too complete to be a beginning, then what is it? Because when you stand in Uruk, when you watch the scribes press writing into clay, when you climb the ziggurat and feel the sky open above you, you begin to sense something unfamiliar, not just intelligence, not just invention, but inheritance, a feeling that the city is built with hands that somehow already know what they are doing. As if the world has practiced this before. This is where the 7th civilization theory comes in, not as a loud claim, not as a dramatic announcement, but as a soft pattern, one that becomes clearer the longer you look. A theory that says Sumer was not the first civilization. Sumer was the seventh, the last visible link in a chain of worlds that rose, fell, and vanished, one after another, like waves that leave no permanent shape behind. At first, 7 sounds like a number from a story, a number you hear in myths and temples, 7 gates, 7 heavens, 7 days, 7 seals, a number that feels sacred because it feels complete. But in Sumer, sacred numbers are rarely random. They're chosen because they fit the universe the way a key fits a lock. 7 is not only symbolic, it is structural. It is a number that suggests layers, steps, levels, stages, and once you start seeing civilization as something layered, you can't unsee it. Because the river land itself is layered. It is made of sediment and time, flood upon flood upon flood, pressed into earth like stacked blankets. The land is literally composed of old endings. So why wouldn't history be the same? Why wouldn't human life rise and fall in repeating cycles, each one buried beneath the next? In the daytime, people in Uruk live like the present is permanent. They trade, they argue, they celebrate, they build homes, they raise children, they think in years, but the land thinks in centuries, and the rivers think in ages. The rivers remember what people are too small to hold inside their minds. They remember that cities are temporary arrangements, that walls can be swallowed, that temples can crack, that even the strongest names can dissolve into dust. So the 7th civilization theory is not really a theory about lost cities. It is a theory about time itself, about the way humans repeat their own climb. Because civilization is not a single event, it is a behavior, a pattern that can be learned, forgotten, and learned again. Imagine it like this. A world begins with scattered villages. People learn the river's moods. They learn planting, they learn storing. Then slowly they gather. A city forms, a temple rises, records begin, the sky is studied, and suddenly life becomes more than survival. It becomes structure. Then it grows. Trade expands. Power concentrates. Kings appear. Laws harden. The city feels unstoppable, and that is the moment it becomes vulnerable, because the larger a civilization becomes, the more fragile it becomes to disruption. A village can move when the river shifts. A city cannot. A small community can survive on improvisation. A massive system collapses when one part fails. A flood doesn't need to destroy every house to end a civilization. It only needs to break the rhythm, destroy storage, salt the fields, cut trade routes, spread fear. And then, slowly, people scatter again. The city empties like a lung exhaling. Bricks remain, but meaning leaves, and time begins its quiet work. Mud fills the streets, weeds split the walls, rain smooths sharp corners. A century passes, and the city becomes a mound. 2 centuries pass, and it becomes part of the landscape. Another flood comes, covering it again. And somewhere, far from the ruins, humans begin to rebuild. Not from nothing, from fragments, from stories, from bits of method that survived, from the stubborn habits of survival. If you listen to ancient myths, you can hear echoes of this cycle. Not just one flood, not just one fall, but a repeating sense of reset, a feeling that the world is always balancing on the edge of being wiped clean. Sumer's mythology carries this in its bones. Even when it speaks about gods and monsters, it speaks like a people who have seen collapse and refuse to be surprised by it again. That is why the temples are built like anchors. That is why the tablets are baked, sealed, stacked, protected. That is why time is measured so carefully. Sumer is a civilization acting like it knows the end can come. So what makes it the seventh? Not a magical list carved into the sky, but the idea that 6 cycles came before, each one leaving behind a little more knowledge, a little more refinement, a little more urgency. 6 attempts at stability, 6 rises into order, 6 falls into mud, and then the 7th arrives, not as a miracle, but as the survivor. Sumer becomes the civilization that lasts long enough to write itself into permanence, not because it is chosen, but because it is prepared. And the number 7 becomes meaningful in a new way, not as luck, not as blessing, but as count, a tally of worlds, a record of how many times humans built something magnificent and then watched it slip away. If that sounds heavy, don't worry. This story isn't meant to frighten you. It is meant to soften you into a deeper calm. Because there is a strange comfort in cycles, a comfort in knowing that endings are not always final. Sometimes an ending is only a pause, a silence between chapters. When Sumer builds a ziggurat, it is building a staircase not just for gods but for memory. It is saying, we have fallen before, we will not fall the same way again. When Sumer writes on clay, it is writing to future hands. It is saying, if you find this after the water has erased us, remember how we lived. Remember the pattern. Rebuild the system. That is why 7 matters, because it suggests intention. It suggests that at some point someone understood. Civilization is a candle in wind, and if you don't protect the flame, the world will go dark again. So they protected it in layers. Layer of myth, layer of ritual, layer of temple authority, layer of writing, layer of storage, layer of numbers, layer of sky watching. Each layer a shield, each layer a step upward, away from the floodline. 7 layers, 7 survivals, 7 ways of not forgetting. And this is where the 7th civilization theory becomes less about mystery and more about a message. Because even if there were not literally 6 forgotten empires before Sumer, the truth is still real in another form. Humans forget, humans rebuild, humans repeat. And Sumer, standing there in the dawn of history, seems to be the first civilization that truly understood this. Not as a fear, as a plan. If you stand on the ziggurat at night and look out across the flat plain, you can almost imagine the older worlds beneath your feet. Not as ghosts, as layers of effort, layers of human desire. People who once believed their city would last forever. People who once wrote songs, made laws, raised children, prayed to the sky, and then vanished. Not because they were weak, but because the world is bigger than any one generation. The river moves, the wind shifts, time continues, and yet, here you are, still listening. Still awake enough to wonder, still alive in a world that another civilization might once have dreamed of reaching. So perhaps the real secret of the 7th civilization is not that Sumer inherited something supernatural, but that it inherited something deeply human, the ability to learn from collapse, to store wisdom in the strongest containers available, to build not just a city, but a continuation. In the next chapter, we will look for the final imprint of this theory, not in the sky, not in a myth alone, but in the place where Sumer's deepest knowledge might have been left on purpose, a secret hidden in plain sight, waiting for whoever comes next to read it and understand. The pattern is the treasure. There is a moment after you spend enough time with Sumer when the mystery changes shape. At first you search for something dramatic, a hidden chamber, a forbidden tablet sealed in wax. a treasure map beneath the ziggurat, a single sentence that cracks history open like thunder. But slowly, gently, the longer you listen to the river, the longer you sit in the temple's shadow, the longer you imagine the scribes pressing their careful marks into wet clay, the more you realize something calmer. The secret was never meant to be found like a stolen jewel. It was meant to be used. Because the greatest secrets are not the ones that hide forever. The greatest secrets are the ones that survive long enough to reach the next hands. And if Sumer truly understood the cycle, rise, collapse, rebuild, then the one thing they would leave behind would not be a story for curiosity. It would be a survival kit, not a box of tools, a pattern, a method, a way of rebuilding a world from rubble. And the strange part is this: they didn't hide it in darkness. They left it in plain sight. They placed it everywhere, in the market, in the temple, in the canals, in the way the city moves like a single breathing system. Because if a flood comes, if a war burns the roofs, if the river swallows the streets, you can lose objects. But you don't lose habits so easily. Habits sink deeper than buildings. Habits live in the hands, in the routine, in what people do without thinking. That is why Sumer's true message is written into behaviour, and if you look closely you can see it. The first part of the secret is simple: store what matters. A city is never destroyed only by the first disaster. It is destroyed by what happens after, when the grain runs out, when the tools vanish, when everyone panics and trades stability for desperation. So Sumer stores. They store grain in sealed rooms. They store oil in jars. They store tools. They store accounts. They store records of what belongs to whom, what is owed, what has been delivered, what has been promised. It might look boring, but boredom is the armour of civilization. Boredom is repetition. And repetition means the system keeps running even when people are tired, even when they are afraid. If the seventh civilization idea is true, then somewhere in the old memory of this land someone learned a hard lesson. You don't collapse when the storm arrives. You collapse when you have nothing saved after it passes. So the first secret is not a secret at all. It is patience. The patience to build storage before you need it. The patience to prepare for a disaster that might not happen this year, but will happen someday. The second part of the secret is even quieter. Write everything down, not for poetry, not for pride, for continuity. A spoken instruction is fragile. A spoken agreement can be twisted. A spoken law can be forgotten. But a mark pressed into clay survives. And in Sumer, clay is everywhere. Earth is abundant. Reed styluses are easy to shape. Fire can harden tablets into permanence. So Sumer chooses a material that matches their world. A world of floods and ruins and dust. Clay is heavy, yes, but heaviness is strength. A clay tablet does not fly away in wind. It does not dissolve with water the way paper would. And if the city burns, a fate that has ended many places in history, the clay becomes even harder, even more permanent. So in a world where disasters erase memory, Sumer chooses the one medium that refuses to disappear. This too is part of the secret, not hidden knowledge, practical immortality. The third part of the secret is the one most people overlook, because it doesn't sound like power. Count time. Time in Sumer is not a vague feeling. Time is managed. Time is tracked like inventory. A day is divided. A month is observed. A season is predicted. And this is not only for religion, it is for survival. Because the land between the rivers is generous, but it is also unforgiving. Planting at the wrong time is a quiet disaster. Harvesting too late is a disaster that smells like rot. So the temple watches the sky, not to romanticize it, to read it, to turn the heavens into a schedule, and the people who can control the schedule control the future. If you were to reduce Sumer's secret into one sentence, it might be this: the future belongs to the ones who plan further ahead than everyone else. Not further in distance, further in time. The fourth part of the secret is not carved into tablets. It is carved into the city itself. Build systems, not miracles. A miracle saves you once. A system saves you repeatedly. A strong man can lift one heavy stone. A ramp can lift 100. A brave hero can defeat one enemy. A law can prevent 1,000 fights. A lucky harvest can feed you for one season. A storage network can feed you through famine. This is why Sumer's greatness feels so calm. It is not built on one dramatic act. It is built on countless small acts repeated until the city becomes stable. Systems are invisible until they fail, and Sumer's systems do not fail easily, because they are designed to endure stress, to endure human weakness, to endure weather, to endure time. And now the secret begins to feel less like mystery, and more like a message sent forward. Because what is a civilization really? It is not just buildings. It is not just wealth. It is not just a king's name. A civilization is the ability to keep going after the world tries to interrupt you. It is continuity. It is memory. It is routine strong enough to survive fear. So Sumer's secret is not a single hidden item. It is a set of instructions distributed through daily life. Like seeds scattered widely, so at least some will survive the storm. Imagine an ordinary morning in Uruk. A woman opens a clay jar and measures grain for bread. A merchant checks weights before trading wool. A worker receives payment recorded by a scribe. A priest marks the moon's position on a tablet. A farmer clears a canal path for water to flow correctly. None of them feel like they are protecting an ancient secret. They feel like they are living. But that is exactly the point. Because if one day the river rises too high, if one day the walls break, if one day the city empties, then somewhere else, someone will still remember how to measure, how to record, how to store, how to rebuild the system from the ground up. That is the kind of secret that survives the end of an empire, not hidden treasure, embedded method. And perhaps that is why Sumer feels like a civilization that should not exist so early. Because it behaves like a civilization that has already been burned once, already drowned once, already scattered once. Even if the people of Uruk do not consciously remember 6 lost worlds, their society behaves as if the memory is in their bones, as if the land itself taught them, as if the river, through countless quiet destructions, trained humans to build smarter each time. Now listen closely. This part matters. Because the most haunting possibility is not that Sumer knew about older civilizations. The most haunting possibility is that Sumer was talking to us. Not directly. Not with modern language, but with evidence, with clay, with systems, with the stubborn insistence that knowledge must survive disaster. Sumer's secret may be the simplest warning ever left behind by human hands. The world ends more often than you think. So build as if it might. Build storage, build records, build schedules, build systems, not out of fear, but out of respect for the cycle, because the river does not hate you, it simply moves. Time does not attack you, it simply continues. And if you want to survive beside forces like that, you don't fight them with strength, you outlast them with structure. The lamps burn low in the temple corridors. The tablets sit in silence on their shelves, heavy and patient. Outside, the city still breathes, still trades, still sings its hymns to the sky. But beneath the noise of daily life, the hidden message remains. Not hidden in darkness, hidden in ordinary things. In the way Sumer stores, in the way Sumer writes, in the way Sumer measures time like it is sacred, and in the way Sumer builds upward, as if it knows the flood can always return. In the next chapter, we will return to the ruins and the river one last time. We will stand at the edge of what remains and listen for the final echo of the seventh civilization. The soft closing truth that turns the entire journey into something calm and strangely beautiful. Night returns to the riverland the way a blanket returns to a sleeping body, slowly, quietly, without urgency. The last light of the sun fades behind the flat horizon, and the world turns softer at the edges. Colours lose their sharpness. Sounds stretch out and become gentle. Even the wind seems to move more carefully, as if it doesn't want to disturb what the darkness is trying to protect. Somewhere beyond Uruk, beyond the markets and courtyards, beyond the busy voices of the living, there are places where the city ends, not with a wall, with silence. A stretch of open ground where brick fragments rest half buried in dust, where old stones sit like forgotten bones, where reeds grow tall enough to hide what remains beneath them. This is where you can feel time most clearly, because time does not roar, time whispers, time smooths. Time takes the sharp corners of history and turns them into gentle slopes, until everything that once felt permanent becomes part of the earth again. If you walked here alone, you might carry a small oil lamp, a simple bowl, a wick, a thin flame that trembles with every breath of air. The lamp's light is warm and soft. It doesn't cut through darkness like a sword. It only makes a small circle of safety, just enough to see your own steps, just enough to remind you that you are present. In that little circle of light, you can see things that daylight would make ordinary. A broken brick stamped with an old mark, a fragment of pottery curved like a crescent moon, a shallow depression in the ground where a wall once stood, a line in the dust where a street used to be. The ruins do not feel frightening, they feel calm. Like the quiet of a house after everyone has gone to sleep. And as you stand there, you begin to understand something that the people of Uruk knew in their bones. Everything built by human hands is temporary, not because humans are weak, but because the world is vast. The river moves, the wind shifts, the seasons rotate, the sky repeats itself endlessly, and a city, no matter how proud, is only one small shape inside a much older rhythm. This is the truth behind the seventh civilization. Not that Sumer was the seventh in a strict count carved into cosmic law, but that Sumer was a civilization that understood it was not the last. Sumer was a civilization that acted as if history had already proven one thing: even the greatest worlds can fall, not always with screams, sometimes with quiet neglect. Sometimes with a flood that rises too high, sometimes with drought that stays too long, sometimes with trade routes breaking, with fields turning salty, with rulers growing careless, with the rhythm of order slipping away. But still, Sumer built, Sumer wrote, Sumer measured, Sumer stored, and those choices matter because they will reveal the deeper secret hidden inside everything you've travelled through tonight. The secret was never a single forbidden object. It was never only a hidden room under the temple. It was never only the whisper of watchers or the heaviness of myths. The secret was a way of thinking, a way of preparing, a way of refusing to let the future become helpless. If you lift your lamp a little higher, the light touches the outline of a low mound nearby. To most eyes, it would look like nothing, just a rise in the ground, a patch of uneven earth. But you know what it is: a buried city, a sealed memory, a layer of history pressed beneath another layer. And in that mound, somewhere in the dark, there might still be clay tablets sleeping in silence. Records of barley and taxes, yes, but also proof of something far more meaningful. Proof that humans once cared enough to remember. Because that is what writing truly is. Not just words, not just language. Writing is an act of defiance against disappearance. It is a way of saying, I was here. It is a way of saying, this happened. It is a way of saying, learn from this. And the most comforting part is that it worked. Even now, across oceans of time, we can still hear the faint echo of Sumer's breath. We can still imagine their streets at dawn. We can still feel the wind on the ziggurat terraces. We can still hear the tap of a stylus pressing order into wet clay. Sumer is gone, but it is not lost, because the pattern survived. The idea survived. And when you think about it, that might be the gentlest form of immortality possible. Not to live forever as a person, but to leave behind something that teaches someone else how to continue. The river moves beside you now, dark and steady. In the lamplight it looks like polished stone. It does not rush. It doesn't hesitate. It simply goes. And for a moment you can imagine all the rivers that have ever existed in human history flowing together into one endless stream. Every city beside them, every farm watered by them, every child who learned to swim in them, every flood that erased a world, every rebuild that began with one brave person stepping forward again. If the seventh civilization theory is true, then the river has seen everything. It has watched the first walls rise. It has watched the last walls crumble. It has watched myths become memories. It has watched memories become dust. And yet, it still moves. It still carries silt, carrying the future inside the mud of the past. That is what makes the ending feel peaceful rather than sad. Because in the cycle of civilizations, nothing is truly wasted. Even collapse becomes fertilizer for the next beginning. Even ruins become foundations. Even forgotten worlds become layers that hold up the new ones. So when we speak of lost civilizations, we're not only speaking about tragedy, we're speaking about continuity, about the way humans, no matter how many times they fall, keep rebuilding the same dream, a safe place, a predictable rhythm. A home that lasts, and here, in this quiet moment beside the river, you can let that dream soften you. Because it means your life is part of something larger than any single time. You are part of the chain, part of the pattern, part of the long human effort to learn, store, remember, and continue. The lamp flame trembles again, not because it is dying, but because the night air is alive. The flame is small, yet it holds its light with stubborn bravery. And that too feels like Sumer, a civilization made of humble materials, mud brick, clay, reed, grain, yet capable of creating order strong enough to echo through time. This is the final gift Sumer leaves behind. Not fear of endings, but respect for preparation. Not obsession with secrets, but devotion to memory. Not the illusion of permanence, but the beauty of continuity. Because when you stop expecting the world to last forever, you begin to build with greater care. You begin to store what matters. You begin to write what matters. You begin to value systems that protect people when emotions and luck fail. you begin to understand that civilization is not a crown. It is a habit of keeping the lamp lit, even when the wind is strong, even when the river rises, even when the world feels uncertain. So now, let the river's sound become softer in your mind. Let the ruins fade into calm shapes. Let the ziggurat far behind you become only a silhouette in memory, steps rising into the night like a patient staircase. And imagine, just for a moment, a sealed clay tablet beneath the ground. Not cracked, not broken, still waiting. As if it carries a message meant for anyone who would come after. Not a threat. Not a prophecy, but something gentler. Build wisely. Store what you need. Write what you learn. Measure time. Remember the pattern, because worlds can fall, but the pattern can return. And now, as the lamp's circle of light grows smaller, take a moment to leave a quiet mark of your own before you drift away. A gentle like, or a subscribe, to help this story survive in the memory of others. As the darkness becomes peaceful instead of empty, you can let yourself rest inside that thought. Not worried, not rushed, only calm, only safe. Good night, sleep well, and drift slowly, like a reed boat on quiet water, back into sleep.